Hi friends, welcome to today's lesson here at Active Self-Protection Extra, and on John's Briefs today, we are going to finish our discussion of being a good, sane, sober, moral, prudent person by discussing why I generally don't call myself or recommend we call ourselves lawful people. Firearms Legal Protection is who I trust to help me after a use of force incident. If you're a Firearms Legal Protection member, you can attend our monthly Active Self-Protection training seminars for free. Check out all they offer to their members at the link below. So we joke about this all the time, that if I were to, put myself in the D&D alignment system, some people are lawful good, right? So their hearts are set on good, and we talked about that in terms of the D&D alignments way back in the discussion of being good. But again, this idea of good, neutral, or evil comes up, but also across the top here we have lawful, neutral, and chaotic. And I would say I am neutral good, not lawful good, and I want to talk about why. In particular, I think that the standard of a good, sane, sober, moral, prudent person is a higher standard than that of a legal person. We always want to say in the law, we don't expect the highest standards. We kind of set minimum standards with the law in terms of the standard of conduct that we expect of people, that they shouldn't go below that. It's not the highest ideals. It's kind of the lowest common denominator. And so I want to be a good, sane, sober, moral, prudent person, not just a lawful person, because it is so much higher than being a lawful person. Also, on the other side of that, I'm just going to be honest with you, some laws are stupid. And if they are stupid and they're immoral, there are immoral laws. I could say, for instance, if we go back to the time and the place during World War II, when it was the law that if a German citizen knew there was a Jew hiding somewhere, they had to tell the authorities of that. That's immoral. That is not okay. You knew that they were going to their death, and therefore I couldn't participate in that law, which would, of course, make me unlawful and yet still good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent. So that's the thing here. Let's look at the principle of that. I can foresee and I can name several instances where somebody could act in ways that are good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent, but aren't lawful. I can also kind of think of plenty of ways of things that could be lawful, but are not good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent. Let's think about the former first. When would something be, not even in a self-defense context, good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent, but not lawful? Well, we have speed limits for a reason, right? And there are limits on how fast we tell people that they can drive. But of course, there are reasons where we might ignore that. Say, for instance, you are with somebody and you're in the car and they start having a heart attack. Well, you're going to ignore the traffic regulations, right? You're going to speed like crazy. You are going to, smartly, in a good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent manner, ignore traffic signs. You're going to blow through red lights while stopping and clearing the intersection like an officer would in an emergency, those kinds of things. But you are going to get them to the hospital while ignoring traffic regulations. Now, I will say this, hopefully, within our law, there's baked in enough kind of discretion for enforcement of laws that we can say, hey, you did a good thing and we want our laws to reflect good things, and so we're not going to prosecute you for that. So hopefully those work up. But even if you did get prosecuted, let's just say they arrested you for reckless driving at the end. No, you saved your loved one's life, and therefore you did the good thing, the sane thing, the sober, moral, prudent thing. So even if you end up having to pay legally for that, it's the greater good. Now, where you're going to hear that talked about in a legal sense is the doctrine of competing harms, or the doctrine of necessity. There are actually several states, mostly in the Northeast, Maine in particular, New Hampshire in particular. There are a couple others, but those two are the ones that you'll kind of see batted about this doctrine of necessity, or doctrine of competing harms, that the law kind of says, well, hey, if what you did because you had to escape something worse or to stop something worse, well then it's justifiable in those particular cases. Say, for instance, you said, listen, a guy was trying to kidnap me and I had been drinking, so I shouldn't have been driving, but if I didn't drive while intoxicated, then I would have been kidnapped, and that would have been far worse. And so I drove drunk and I didn't hurt anybody, and I stopped doing it when I could as soon as I got away. Well, then in those places they would say, well, and under the doctrine of competing harms, we're not going to charge you with that, and so you should be okay. Now, of course, we want our laws, if we can, to overlap good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent, right? So specifically, and especially in self-defense cases, we want those to be the same thing. We want people to act in good ways, in sane and sober and moral and prudent ways. Now, we do really actually say here, though, that we expect people in a legal sense to act in reasonable ways, not good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent. So the standard is actually a little bit less. So let's think about some ways potentially, and I'm just talking potentially. For legal reasons, this is purely hypothetical, and I'm certainly not giving you advice. I'm just kind of thinking through some ways we might see somebody act this way. Let's just say, for instance, somebody had an indiscretion earlier in life and had committed a white-collar felony. Now, you can commit felonies in 1,000 ways in the United States that have nothing to do with, being an immoral person. Now, hopefully not, but you guys know like I do, there's so many ways you can commit a felony, it's ridiculous. And then you don't have any Second Amendment rights anymore. And yet somebody, I could see them being a rehabbed person, having, served their time, gotten out, become a good member of society, and the classic Les Miserables, Jean Valjean kind of thing, except for the escape part, okay? But then they say, wait a minute, I'm under an actual threat, but I can't go buy a firearm because I'm a prohibited possessor, but I feel like I have to ignore that in order to be able to adequately protect myself, and the risk of not doing so is too great, and so I'm going to illegally own firearms. Now, I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do, but I'm saying it could be a good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent thing, but not a legal thing. I can be straight up honest with you now. He's dead and gone, and so there's none of this. My grandfather was a prohibited possessor when I was a teenager. He actually got convicted of attempted murder for shooting a guy in the face who had beat my grandma up, and I don't have all the story on that. I'm sure there's crazy stuff involved that I'll never get to know about, but that did happen, and my grandpa did 3.5 years in California State Penitentiary for attempted murder. Then when he got out, of course, he was a convicted felon. Now, ask me how many guns we had around in those 3.5 years, after those 3.5 years. When he got out, I was 13. I worked for him until he died when I was 19, a little ways before I joined the Navy. And we always had guns around. We were always hunting. It was never a problem. I don't even know if I'd call him a good guy. He was a nice guy, and I loved him to death. He's a bit of a rapscallion and a hellion. If you knew him, I'll tell that story another time. But again, not lawful, but not dangerous. And so was that wrong? Is that not good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent? I don't know, man. I can't tell you what the right thing to do there is. I could also see the other side, something being legal but not good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent. I think there's a couple of those instances in law. There are states where it's perfectly legal to drink alcohol while you are carrying a firearm. And in those states, it's not a legal standard. They consider it reasonable for people to have some alcoholic beverages. I don't think it's prudent at all to have alcohol in your system while you're carrying a firearm, and I would keep those two separate. And so I would say that the prudence, and remember, sober means having well thought through and connected the consequences of our actions and those things. And I don't think it's prudent or sober and to carry a firearm while intoxicated. Again, not saying sober versus drunk here, saying, it's not sober-minded to do those things. And so I think that the standards are different there. I could also see, for instance, I've argued for this at times. There are times under Texas Penal Code 942 where Texas allows people to use deadly force to stop a property crime. Frankly, I think that's immoral. I honest to God think it's immoral, and I know it's going to cost me some people saying that, I'm wrong or whatever. And in Texas, they consider that reasonable. It's not good. It's not sane, in my opinion. It's not sober or moral. I don't even think it's prudent, but it is legal. And I think that if you like that stuff, man, I'd really kind of think through the good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent paradigm, because again, I don't think it is any of those things. And yet in those rare instances in Texas, in those very narrow parameters in Texas, it's legal to do so. And I think those are the same things, getting away from the Texas thing. When we talk about when is deadly force justified? Well, what would a reasonable person do in these particular cases? And so then we ask that idea of, can I shoot somebody? Should I shoot somebody? Must I shoot somebody? I think when you're in the should and must, you're more into the good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent person. But when we ask can, we're asking about legally. Is that a legal thing? So they're not necessarily the same thing at all. And that's why I hesitate to use them. So when I talk to folks about being a good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent person. I don't talk to somebody about being a legal person for the reasons that, number one, I don't want them to fall to that standard. Number two, I see enough nuance there that there are times that they don't overlap, and I'd rather have somebody be good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent than legal. And just because they're legal doesn't mean they're acting in good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent ways. And so that's how I prefer to do that. Now, I get it. In our national political debates and on our discussions of Second Amendment rights and all these things, we talk about being lawful gun owners. And this is another reason I don't like it. Because quite frankly, a lot of the gun laws in our nation, depending on where you live, are completely immoral and completely wrong. There are states that completely deny people the right to self-defense, that completely ignore the Constitution and the enumerated right to not only keep arms, but to bear arms of all kinds. And so I think that is completely immoral and completely not okay. And so while when we're in those discussions, in a political realm, we might talk about, well, we want to be lawful, I would much rather talk about being good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent. Let me say as well that if you choose to act in good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent ways, but you are not lawful, you need to understand that the government still will take the right to punish you for breaking the law. So just because you are acting in good ways, the authorities might choose to punish you anyways. And now, okay, I'm not proselytizing or whatever. My personal ethic of life as a citizen, I kind of have dual citizenship in the kingdom of Jesus as well as here as an American citizen. And so I recognize that for me, I answer to a higher power. I answer to the King of Kings. Now, that doesn't mean that the United States or whatever jurisdiction I'm in, I like to travel internationally too, that if I do something against their laws, that they might punish me. And if you're going to act in ways that aren't always lawful, but are good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent, you hope that you can stand behind that good, sane, sober, moral, prudent behavior and explain that and be justified in your actions. But if not, you have to be ready to accept the punishment. I'll give you a for instance of this, okay? I think in most places, well, not I think, speed limits are not hard, fast limits. They are general rules. For instance, it might have a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit somewhere, but if it's foggy, nighttime, raining, and the roads are starting to ice up, at 40 miles an hour, you can get a ticket on that road because it's not a safe and prudent speed, right? So a good speed for you to be driving. And likewise, when it's daytime and dry and there's light traffic, go for it. Gosh, I remember right after the lockdown started in 2020, and on a freeway near my house, I'm driving my 17 Mustang GT Premium, or it's a performance package with some tasteful upgrades in it. And I literally got on that freeway and there wasn't another soul on the road. I had to go somewhere, lockdowns had started, blah, blah, blah. Get on this Highway 51 for those of you here in Phoenix, and got on from the 101, and there's literally not another soul on either side of the road. And so for legal reasons, of course, I'm not going to say what I did there, but I'm sure you can imagine how tempting it might be to test out and see kind of how that Mustang giddied up down the road when nobody else was there in a perfectly safe manner that wasn't necessarily legal. Now, that said, if you do that stuff and there happens to be a police officer there and they want to pull you over and write you a big fat ticket or haul your butt off to jail for reckless endangerment or criminal speeding or whatever, you got to be ready to just take that and to recognize, okay, that's your authority and I will not be a pain in your butt or whatever. Which actually is a funny thing when I get, and I've been pulled over a few times here and there. I tend to drive too fast, generally as a rule. Last time I got pulled over was for an expired registration. Guys, I can't believe I did that. And again, when you're kind to a law enforcement officer and you say, hey man, I get it, you're the one in authority, write me the ticket or whatever, yes sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, no sir, I don't know why you pulled me over, no I don't, I don't give up any of my rights or those kinds of things, but here you are, and just take the ticket and don't argue with them on the side of the road. That shows a good person rather than just a legal one. I hope you've enjoyed this series, and if you have any questions about it, if you have a question on one of the others, on the good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent, leave that question on those videos so that we can kind of keep those together. But if you got questions for me about why you think, that this idea of being lawful is not the thing for me, and if you disagree with me, let me know why. Or if you do agree or you have questions, let me know those questions too. I'd love to answer them. God bless you. I hope it helps.